monastic life is a very unique calling. It's not normal. And that's a good thing because really it's extraordinary. If it were a normal life, what would be the point? There has to be a lot of thought, prayer, and testing that goes into considering living the monastic life. Saint Benedict clearly puts emphasis on the idea of testing those who seek entrance. He says, do not grant newcomers to the monastic life an easy entrance. But as the apostle says, test the spirits to see if they are from God. And this can be a very long process, both internally and externally, for the applicant and for the community, to discover if their hearts and minds from the outset are truly directed towards God. And if they show promise and the community agrees, that's when they can enter. And that's when life really begins for them.
A man comes to the monastery to seek to know God, but also, in the same knowing, to know himself. I entered with a large group, perhaps one of the biggest, if not the biggest group to come into the abbey. There was an attraction in the monastery because the juniorate, which was then called the clericate, was large. And large both in numbers, but also in effervescence of life. There was a lot of life going on in these men, and that was drawing. A man comes to the monastery to seek to know God, but also, in the same knowing, to know himself. And whether or not that's explicit, in other words, that's why I'm coming, no, not necessarily, but in fact, he's seeking to know himself and to know God and to know himself in the love of God. And as that unfolds, and you take up the Benedictine way, the way of Saint Benedict, you take up the ancient monastic way, which we inherited through him, which rests on the pillars of humility and obedience. They're really one thing with two facets or aspects or two sides to them, humility and obedience. And it has to do with coming to that, I'll call it a kind of naked appreciation or honest appreciation of the self in the eyes of God. The person entering should expect to find an atmosphere of challenge in the. It's like throwing a stone in a cylinder that goes round and round and round. It's meant to polish the stone. That's one of the images that's often used. And I think that's so true that that's the challenge. And the challenge is coming to accept one's own humanity as one experiences the humanity of a great variety of what I'll call characters. And if you could hand a person a pill and say, take this and you'll get it, it would be wonderful. But that isn't possible. It only comes about through a lot of hard work and soul searching and conflict bearing, because you bear conflict within yourself, between yourself and others, between yourself and your circumstances. That includes your body. And those kinds of things are summarized in what Benedict teaches about the need to be humble, in other words, to be truthful before God, and to be obedient. That is to say, to to use the circumstances of one's life as guides to clarify who I am, what's going on inside of me. The challenge is to accept the element of time that is required to make the changes necessary in the person. Actually, you can say it's a lifetime time frame, but if you get too rambunctious about, I've got to know everything or I've got to be able to change like that, it doesn't work. And I think that's a big challenge, because in our culture today, there is the backdrop of instant gratification through punch a button and it happens. I think the biggest joy has to do with the coming to a sense of self-possession that's not proud, that's not ambitious, but it's a sense of possessing oneself as one grows in the awareness that I don't have to accomplish something, I have to give in to someone, and that of course is God.